morning. First of all, I want to thank everyone for hanging out and showing up this morning. I know it's last day and everything, so it's good to see everyone. I want to thank the ARC for allowing me to speak today, and I want to thank Stone Technologies, the integrator that I worked with. I'd like to give you a little bit of background about me. I'm the project engineer for electricity and automation at the LJ Minor plant in Cleveland, Ohio. And we are owned by Nestlé. We've been owned by Nestlé since about 1986. And I've been there for 26 years. And I grew with the plant. And I'm going to get into a little bit of our history and how we grew and how quickly we've grown and through all the pains that we've gone through. So let's get started with that. At our plant, we make bases for soups and gravies and flavor concentrates, sauces and things of that nature. We're more of a ingredient company. You won't see a lot of our product out on the consumer shelf, but the chefs love us. We are the gold label in the base industry. We are a very flexible, small batch, custom formula factory. That's kind of what we prided ourselves on early in the process. When Dr. Miner started the business back in 1961, he started it on the premise that he wanted to make an easy way for, actually I think it was related to the military, he wanted chefs in the military to be able to make a full-bodied stock without having to go through the whole process of boiling, your proteins and your vegetables and everything together. And so he put together this process of, or the product of being able to create this stock from this base. And what happened was the business started to grow, and a lot of chefs started to use the product, and eventually we started getting a lot of requests for custom flavors and things like that. So we wound up going into the business model became we had to be able to do a lot of changeovers. In the plant, it is not unusual for us to do 2 to 3 product changeovers in a shift. I know some of the Nestlé plants out there, we're not a Baby Ruth or a Butterfinger factory or anything like that where they run the same thing all week long. We're constantly changing, and it really makes things challenging sometimes. We put out over 300 different manufactured products from our factory. All different pack sizes of all different versions of the product. We may have a chicken base that we may have 4 or 5 different versions of that chicken base. So we've got a lot of internal SKUs. So even though we're process manufacturing, we kind of operate in a way like a discrete manufacturing operation because we have our factory divided up into the little sections where we produce all the ingredients that all come together in one final process eventually. Over 500 different raw materials, over 200 different packaging materials that we have to manage, and that translates into about 1,500 different internal recipes that we use to manufacture all our different products. There are some products that we may manufacture once a year. It all depends on the customer, all depends on the size, but we have to be ready to shift gears at a moment's notice. So it makes as I'm going to get to shortly, it makes the automation part of things kind of challenging. Our market channels, we do a lot for the little mom and pop restaurants. You may, if you have a Costco membership or something, or a Sam's Club, you may see some of our product in there because some of the mom and pop shops, they like to go and shop there. We have chain accounts like Olive Garden, industrial like Darden. We do some exports, and we also have internal customers. I think Stouffer's uses some of our bases in some of their frozen entrees. And this is what the factory looked like back in 1961. Dr. Miner, this is a car wash, and Dr. Miner bought this building. He recognized the need to start growing the business because of the requests he was getting, so he bought this car wash, and I'll come back to that in a couple of slides. But we've been through a lot of growing pains. When I started there 26 years ago, the plant was only about 25,000 square feet. and now we're up over 200,000 square feet. So in the last 25 years, we've grown 8 times what we were when I started there. We've gone through multiple process and packaging changes, doing things by hand. When the business first started out, the batches of the bases were made in very small quantities, and they were filled into glass jars with ice cream scoops, and we had to put the lids on by hand. And when I started there, they had their first couple of pieces of automated packaging machinery, and it was a big deal. And the PLCs at that time were, very, the PLC 5 and the Slick 100s were starting to emerge as control platforms. And we've gone through a huge culture change. When I started there, the business was very family-oriented. I think there were maybe 50 employees total, and now we're up over 300. Still not large in comparison with some of the Exxon Mobils and things like that, but for us, it's quite large. And the culture change that I've seen, we've gone being that small family-oriented business now is it's kind of I don't want to say it's negative, but it's different. When I walk in on a second shift for some reason, I see faces that I've never seen before, where I used to be able to walk in on any given day and you knew everybody. So we've grown, and it's been painful to some degree. But we went from a completely manual business to a more automated and flexible and more complex. As I mentioned, we needed to be able to be very flexible, do a lot of changeovers quickly. And we had to adapt many new systems. When I first started there, there's probably people in the room that remember the old IBM VAX systems. That's what we were using. And so we had to start to integrate into a higher level type ERP system. Today we use SAP like we do in all the other Nestlé plants. We put in batch management systems. We started doing downtime tracking. We put in a full-blown MES. We're doing recipe management. And it's been a long road. And this is what the plant looks like today. Just to the left of that marker, that A, and a little bit south on that picture, a little bit north on that picture, is where the original car wash existed. And the original walls from the car wash still exist today. We left those up for nostalgic reasons. They've got this pretty neat green tile on them. And it's always neat when we take tours to the plant, we always try to point that out and say, these are the 4 walls that this business started within, and we've kept it at kind of the heart of the plant. And so what I'm going to talk a little bit about today to relate to the project end of things is the latest project that we've done, which pretty much encompasses the whole southern part of the plant, all of that grass area and that parking lot on the bottom. We just recently built a 75,000 square foot expansion that took that whole part of the plant. So we had some challenges. We needed to maintain that flexibility and quality. And what that meant was that we were going to have even less manual control now. And that was really a difficult thing for the people that had grown with the business like me, because they were used to, for lack of better words, micromanaging the process. They were used to doing everything by hand. So to actually automate things now, it was a little bit of a scary thing for them. So we automated our material handling from our production side all the way through the packaging. It's something completely new. We used to fill our VMAGs, or bins as we call them, and have to push those by hand through the plant from wherever that product was produced up to the packaging line. So now we've completely automated that. And we needed a way to handle process orders through the multiple systems, through the different units, because we divide up our process into process orders for each area of the plant. I know some plants, they have maybe one process order that encompasses the whole operation from raw material to finished product, but we generate process orders for every stage of the process. And part of that is track and trace, part of it is finance, but it's the way that we do things, and we needed a way to be able to handle those process orders throughout the different systems and different cost centers. And of course, we had to continue to integrate with MES and ERP in our SAP system. That was kind of challenging. We had done it with our production side of the factory a number of years ago, and now it was time to pull the packaging side of the factory into the MES and the ERP. We had been doing downtime tracking and so forth, some of the components of MES, but we weren't doing any of the order handling on the packaging side of the factory. So again, our biggest challenge was to automate our equipment intercommunication and maintain our flexibility and continue to support that business model of being very flexible and small batch oriented. So obviously, as we automated, we needed to be able to tell each of the cost centers what was happening next, and the operators needed to know, conveyor systems and things like that needed to be programmed, barcode scanners. So we needed a way to do that, and so what we did is we put in what I like to call is just a supervisory control layer. You could probably argue that it's part of MES, but from my perspective, it acts as an interface between the MES and our equipment. And we integrated PACML. I'm not going to get into a discussion about all the nuts and bolts of PACML. I just want to talk about it from a solution standpoint. But it was a great solution for us, and I had heard about PACML before we started the project, and knew that we wanted to use it. So it was important to me that we go out and we look for integrators that had PACML experience. And so we went and we found Stone, and we found a few others, and happy to say that we selected Stone, and they've been great working with us. But PACML allowed us to propagate all that relevant data between our layers, between the MES and the equipment, handling things like process parameters, and as I said, product information, UPC codes that we needed to pass down to the conveyor system. All of that information resides in SAP and the ERP and gets passed down through the supervisory control layer down to the necessary equipment. And the other thing that the PACML did for us is it provided our triggers for our automated inventory transactions. So on certain pieces of equipment where we are consuming materials or producing materials, the PLCs are set up with the logic that we set certain triggers that the supervisory system looks for and then performs the necessary transactions to either consume or produce those materials up to the ERP system, and allows things to keep on moving through the factory. So when we talked about doing PACML, when I talked about it to the project team, and maybe some of you know, but I've had the experience of sometimes the automation guy is the last to know what's going on, and it was kind of the case on this project. They had picked a few OEMs and started working with a few OEMs before they even started talking with me about a control scheme. So we were kind of playing catch-up the whole time. So when I saw what we needed to do and thought that PACML was a good solution for us, I started talking to the team about that, and they were a little apprehensive. They weren't sure really what it was all about. So it was important that we hired a certified integrator that had PACML experience, because they could come in, they could look at the project, and they could make the correlations between what we needed to do on the factory floor with what PACML could do for us. They then took, with their good project management skills, they were able to come in and do a presentation and help out and show our project team and our internal factory teams what PACML was all about, and relate it to them in layman's terms by using practical examples, and to tell them that it wasn't really a black box kind of technology. They were able to explain it and relate the flexibility of it and how easy it would be to expand as the plant grows down the road, which right now if you saw, we're kind of landlocked. I don't know how much more we're going to grow, but we do have that ease of expansion and deployment. So the other part of this project was, I talked about some of the OEMs. I think we dealt with 4 different equipment OEMs on this project, and we needed them to be able to adapt PACML, and that was a challenge. Another point about strong project management skills is that Stone was able to start working with these integrators and to help convince them that this was a good solution and it was going to work for us. And of course, being the customer, it's what we wanted. So, but as you can guess, we got the, well, this isn't our standard approach. We want to put in our standard code. We don't want to put in something that's going to be risky. And so it was kind of difficult. It was not an easy road with the OEMs. But one of the first things we needed to do was to sit down and finalize a PAC-ML structure that was going to suit everybody's needs. So maybe one piece of equipment needed certain information and another, it was different from maybe what the conveyor system needed. But basically we had to sit down and settle out on what that structure was going to be. So we had this big meeting. We got all 4 OEMs into the room together, and we started talking about that and finalized our structure. And of course, there was a lot of apprehension, as I mentioned, and a lot of tough questions. And they were worried about how are they going to learn it? How are they going to adapt it in? How are they going to support it in the long run? And of course, how much additional time is going to take? As I said, I was brought into the project kind of late in the game, and I didn't have the opportunity to tell the other project engineers that were hiring the OEMs that, well, maybe you want to have the OEMs think about how they're going to integrate the equipment, and that we might need to have them spend some time doing some engineering and some extra coding for the solution that we need. And that proved to be a challenge as well. So, and of course, who's going to be responsible when there are issues with it? Our integrator provided sample PLC code to all of the OEMs, which is really helpful. They had basically had everything ready to go. They had all the documentation, and they even offered to work directly with the OEM engineers, the programmers, conference calls, whatever was necessary to help them understand it so that they could adapt it and they could tie into it with their own logic. And as I mentioned, the OEM response was not all favorable. We basically had 2 of them that basically they embraced it and they started to understand it, and they adapted their code and put the right triggers in, and it went very well with those integrators. Unfortunately, we had a couple that didn't want anything to do with it. They basically passed back the ownership to either the factory or back to the integrator. And of course, our integrator, they stepped up and they were able to fill the gap. And what happened is they basically wrote the code for the OEM and installed it in their PLC. And that was a big thing for us. Otherwise, obviously, the solution wouldn't have worked. So a little bit about our lessons learned, and I'm going to echo some of the things that Tom talked about. I think my presentation probably complemented his very well, because we're going to talk about some of the same things. But we have to have those well-defined specifications and acceptance by all the stakeholders, and that's definitely a must inside the factory, within your factory teams. If you don't have that, I mean, once coding starts, changes to the PAC-ML structure can be costly. And that's not just from a PAC-ML standpoint, but for any solution that's put in place. And from the PAC-ML standpoint, I think it needs to be a lot more globally exposed to our OEMs. It shouldn't be some kind of voodoo or something that they haven't heard of. None of the OEMs had heard of PAC-ML, and again, that's why we had all the apprehension. But it would be nice to be able to contact an OEM that's going to bid on a project and ask them if they know about PAC-ML, and them to say, yes, we actually do have a solution for that, and we can help you out with that. So until OEMs can embrace PAC-ML and start to offer it as part of their package, there's probably going to be an additional cost. There's always integration cost involved. But I guess it all depends on how apprehensive they are about tackling something like PAC-ML and installing it, or whatever your solution might be. But obviously, I think it's pretty obvious if you approach any OEM about doing something other than what their standard solution is, there's probably going to be some type of an upcharge. Have a contingency plan. If your OEMs aren't willing to adapt to the system that you want to put in, make sure that your integrator can help you. And again, the CSIA certification, I think, really helps with that because they understand the business, they had the knowledge, they were able to do what they needed to do to keep the project online. We want to make sure that our integrator is familiar with Pachamel, but also to train. Like I said, we had a big meeting with the OEMs, and they sat down and they did some training, and they had the documentation, and that was a pretty big thing. So they facilitated. They act as a pretty big facilitator with the OEMs to be able to get things on track. And sometimes it was a matter of not just the integrator working with the OEMs, but with the OEMs working with each other. So that also needed to be facilitated as well. As a last resort, your integrator needs to be willing to assume that implementation task. That's important that you have that backup plan, and they need to be able to step in and write that code if they need to, if this is the solution you're going to go with and your OEMs back away from you. And make sure there are plenty of checks and balances to avoid finger pointing. This was one thing that was kind of big on our project, was that we had one of the vendors that backed away from using Pachamel, and we let the integrator do it. It became an easy target or an easy scapegoat for the issues that they were having with their equipment. So you want to make sure that that you have a way of auditing or reconciling what's actually going on in the code with what's going on in their code, so that you don't have this finger pointing, and it just takes longer to resolve the issues when things like that happen. Okay. Well, again, I want to thank you all for your attention.